This is Theology Bits with Pastor Ben, a ministry of Central Lutheran Church, Eugene, Oregon. Today we continue our ongoing series, Continuity and Change in the Old Testament, and we're actually on video 10 with the rise of David. And remember, this series is asking, what's different here? They changed their religiosity in a striking way, and now how is it being expressed, and why is it they don't see it as such a huge shift? And so today we're going to look at this new context, the rise of King David. But to do that, we have to review what we talked a little bit about last time, which was the role of the first king, that is Saul, which really was a tragedy. It is not completely Saul's fault that this went terribly wrong, because the dynamic when there was Saul was that he was the king, and he was in charge of political affairs. But there was still living a judge by the name of Samuel. And Samuel was in charge of religious affairs, and there was a strict dividing line between those two things. Now, we in America would say, well, sure, church and state, that makes sense. They had no such thing as church and state. What they had was an odd system, a system set up to fail. In fact, Saul gets in trouble for what does he do? He offers a sacrifice, which was not his purview. That was supposed to be for the judge. But he does it because he knows, Saul knows, the only way this community, this people, has ever been united was through their religiosity, through their worship practice. And so that was the dynamic we left with. Now we have a new coronation of David, a new king. And the newness of this is paramount. It is not a descendant of Saul. He is someone who is selected to be deliberately different. And we're going to find what it means to be king is deliberately different. So the first thing David does after being coronated is he sets up a new capital, Jerusalem. This mountain was not a place that was already conquered. This was a place, as the Jebusites lived, and maybe saw as a special place. He conquers it, and when he conquers it, he sets it up as his capital. And there's a few aspects going on there, but one of the things he's done is cemented. They are now a nation. Before, they really were a people group. They were 12 disparate tribes that were trying to find a way to unite themselves together. And now, how are you going to do it? By being a nation. You have a capital. And then what's the first move he does in this capital? He brings in the Ark of the Covenant. That religious center that now he brings into his capital. This distinction between the political and religious is gone. Now, David, as king, is going to have purview over both religious and political affairs. And the first thing he does, offer a sacrifice. By the way, the very thing Saul got in trouble for, he does and is praised for it. Because now this nation is going to be a nation where it is 100% religious, 100% political. The two are completely united because, of course, it had always been united in that way. And so now we have a new role show up, where if the king is the one who is in charge of religious affairs, in addition to political affairs, then, well, aren't there some other people who might be more qualified to deal with this and on religious affairs? And there's something called the rise of a figure by the office of a prophet. There had been prophets before. Saul was even a prophet, believe it or not, of people who went into kind of ecstasy and would proclaim the word of God. But now the prophet is an advisor to the king on religious matters. And so we have, for example, in David's lifetime, the prophet Nathan, who can advise him on religious matters, but Nathan can't actually do anything. He only advises the king. And the king is going to be the one who acts. If you recall, in this Deuteronomistic history where this is found, we have this dynamic of there is God, there is Israel. That which connects them is Torah. We've had that since the book of Deuteronomy. And when they're following Torah, there are blessings. When they're not following Torah, there are curses. And this comes right out of the Sinai covenant and Deuteronomy. And they as a whole do this. They as a whole are following Torah or not following Torah. And then when things are going well or things are going poorly, it's kind of a little bit of a litmus test. Who are we? How are we doing? Well, now we've introduced something, which is the king. The king interrupts this sequence because now it's no longer how the whole people of Israel are following God or not, but instead how the king is following. Because again, the king has authority over religious affairs. The king could be righteous or not righteous, and everyone is going to experience the curses or the blessings that come from that. It has abrogated the whole system. Well, so thereby, what does the prophet do? He advises. That's all the prophet can do. Now we're in a totally different model. The whole people might cry out to the king to change behavior. Before this, in the book of Exodus, they cried out to God for God to act. But now they can't do that. Now they cry out to the king. And it can go well, the king can listen, but that's what they're doing. And this actually makes sense if what they are is a nation. The nation as a whole is either right before God or not right before God. There is no individual people. They are one thing. They are united. Remember, that was one of the things they wanted to be, was united, not 12 disparate tribes. Well, congratulations, you're united. But now whatever's happening in one place is happening in all the places. You are all together expressing who you are before God. It is a true collective experience. And so later we see, finally, to cement this, a covenant, a special covenant with David in 2 Samuel 7. And this covenant builds upon but also refines the covenants we've had before. It starts when David says to God, I want to build you a house, meaning a temple. And of course, where does he want to build it? In his capital. Now, that's actually going to happen one generation later. And why does he want to build this house? Well, of course, he wants to build it because if God is present there in his capital, in that space, then the capital is never going to move. This has become permanent. And so what David wants is shrewd politics. God says, not yet. God says, I'm going to build a house for you, David, rather than you building me a house. And what God means by that is the kingship are going to go to your descendants. Precisely what did not happen here with Saul is going to happen to David. Your dynasty is going to continue. Your throne is going to continue. And then it describes how that's going to look. While your throne will never be at issue, you're still going to have the success failure that you had over here in the Sinai covenant. It'll just be now based on of how is it that the king acts in relationship to Torah and how that Torah leads to success or failure. And it says specifically, when you don't obey, this is God speaking, I will punish you with the rod that mortals use, meaning foreign enemies will challenge you. Remember, this is being written after the covenant has already, or when the nation has already fallen. How did this happen? Well, if you weren't following, failure was possible, but it wasn't going to be God sending down a lightning bolt. It was going to be the very normal politics that you had to deal with. And so that same structure is there. The only difference is now it's the king and now it's for the whole nation. Then we also have one very important development. I'll use a different color to emphasize it. A relationship of God and the king as Father, Son. Believe it or not, this is not a very common thing in the Old Testament. And for those of you in the New Testament, it's very familiar to you because Jesus uses it all the time. But the language of Father, Son is very unusual. But here, that metaphor is used. And that metaphor is different than the covenant that we had with Abraham. I'm going to be your God, you're going to be my people. Or with Moses, which was the metaphor of a lord and a subject. Here, it's a relational term of a parent and a child. Still definitely has a power dynamic going on, but a very different one. It has to do with this kingship is going to last. This house is going to last. I'm going to remain a biological parent in that metaphor, as I always will be, even if you disobey. Your throne will never be lost. Now, we're going to find out later that it doesn't say, and the nation is going to look like what the nation is right now. There very well could be some things lost, and of course it will be, but your descent will survive. And so the focus becomes about stability, about the durability of God and Israel. And there is now a new trust that they have because of this covenant, that God really is going to be on their side and the side of this nation. They are going to be a people of God in a new way than they were before. And so national politics becomes the focus of almost the rest of the the Deuteronomistic history, because religion was seen as part of national politics. Believe it or not, that wasn't always the case. It was always close, but it wasn't quite there. So now religiosity is going to be framed through the capital more than it is through worship practice where you are. This is going to lead us next time to the development of the temple and the way that radically transforms how they were being religious before God. It starts with them becoming a nation, and that the political ruler, the king, has new authority and new structures to unify, but also consolidate religiosity in a particular way. This has been Theology Bits. I'm Pastor Ben.